I'm assuming if you're watching this video on YouTube, which you have to be, then you probably know who Mr. Beast is. Just in case you don't, just real quick, he's a 24-year-old, Greenville, North Carolina. He is the 4th most subscribed channel on YouTube and the #1 individual YouTuber on YouTube. And I thought it would be an interesting exercise to explore if Mr. Beast were my client. He's not my client, never met him, don't know him, but I thought it would be interesting to explore if Mr. Beast were my client, what kind of estate planning would I do for him? Now, what I had to do to, figure that out is I have to know something about what his assets are, what his income is. Ultimately, of course, I want to meet with him and find out, kind of what his dreams and desires are so that we can set up a plan that meets those dreams and desires. But we're going to make some assumptions. I've used some information gathered from the internet, which who knows how accurate that is, but that told me a little bit about some of the assets that we know he owns. And then I'm going to talk through kind of what I would do for Mr. Beast if he came to see me and asked me to do his estate planning. So I found out on the internet that last year he earned $54 million. His net worth is estimated to be around $105 million. And we know that he owns several businesses. He has a couple of different YouTube channels. I'm not sure how many, but at least 2, maybe more. And we know that he owns a hamburger company, Mr. Beast Burgers, and they franchise that. So they have franchise operations in different places. So we know at least he has those assets. And we have some kind of estimate as to what his net worth is. Of course, that information comes from the internet. Who knows, how accurate it is. So the first thing the other things we know about Mr. Beast, at least according to the internet, is he's not married. As far as we know, he has no kids. So those are relevant things in terms of, how we'd approach his estate planning. We also know about Mr. Beast that he has a real interest in charity work, and he's got various charities that he's worked with or started. And so we know that that's one of the factors that's going to be a part of his estate planning. So the first thing we want to do is we want to figure out what kind of estate tax exposure does Mr. Beast have. So if we assume, again, based on the information we found on the internet, that his estate is worth $105 million, and we know that in 2023 the estate tax exemption is $12,900,000, then we know that his estate tax potential is $36,840,000. That's if he did no planning at all, had no estate tax planning. He's not married, so we can't use his wife's estate tax exemption, which we would be able to do if he were married. So if he were married, we could use both his $12.92 million exemption and we could use his wife's exemption. But since he's not married, we can't do that. So we know that that's what his potential exposure is if he has no planning at all. So that would be a tax bill to the federal government, $36,840,000 if Mr. Beast passed away today and he had no estate planning at all. So now we've got kind of the relevant factors in how we put together a plan for him. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with a basic planning. So the foundation for everything will be the good old red bucket, the revocable living trust. So we're going to set up a revocable living trust for Mr. Beast, and we're going to put his personal assets into that. So there'll be some other things that we'll talk about that we'll use for his businesses, but his basic personal assets will go into this revocable living trust. That will give him access to any of those assets during his lifetime as he needs them. He can take them out. He can do whatever he wants to with them. If he becomes incapacitated, then somebody will take over this bucket and manage it for him, the trustee. Likewise, when he passes away, because everything's in this bucket, his family won't have to worry about probate. So the foundation for his estate plan will be a revocable living trust. Now we'll also do a will for him. It's something called a pour over will. And the purpose of a pour over will is to help if there are any assets that have been left out of the red bucket. So we've got a pour over will, and we pour those assets over into the trust, and then we can use the trust to take care of those assets. But that way we can take care of anything that's been left out of the trust that we're going to need to probate. So that's the reason that we want to have a will, even though we have the revocable living trust. Now, the other thing that we're going to want to do for Mr. Beast is to make sure that if he winds up in a situation where he needs some sort of medical care and he can't make those decisions himself. So for example, if he had a car wreck and suffered some sort of injury and he was unconscious, and he couldn't talk to the doctors about what kind of care he wanted, we're going to prepare an advance directive for him so that he has a healthcare agent in place who can make those medical decisions for him. That's hugely important, especially for somebody who's unmarried like Mr. Beast, because his spouse is not going to be able to step in and make those decisions. So we need to make sure that he has identified the person that he wants to make the decision, the healthcare agent, and that he's given them guidance in that advance directive on what he would want them to do in specific situations. So for example, does he want to have a ventilator used? Does he want CPR? Does he want life-sustaining treatments? Or does he want to have the plug pulled if, God forbid, something happens that leaves him in a situation where he's on life support? The next thing that we want to do for Mr. Beast is we want to make sure that he's got a HIPAA release. Now, HIPAA is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And when you go to the doctor's office and they give you the clipboard, one of the pieces of paper on the clipboard, you know the clipboard, right? One of the pieces of paper on the clipboard is a HIPAA release. And it says something along the lines of, I authorize you to talk to the following people about my medical care. And if you are competent and you are healthy when you walk into the doctor's office, then you can by all means sign that HIPAA release, write down the people that you want the doctor to be able to talk to you about your care, sign that, they'll keep that on file. And then, you know, if your spouse, for example, you put on that list, needs to call the doctor and check on a prescription or that sort of thing, then your spouse would be able to do that. Now, unfortunately, if you're in a situation where you're not competent, you're not able to sign a HIPAA release, federal law prohibits medical providers from sharing information about your medical treatment. So if Mr. Beast were in that hypothetical car wreck and his family called the hospital to find out what's going on and there's no HIPAA release on file, then they won't be able to release that information. So we'll prepare a HIPAA release for Mr. Beast that will spell out these are the folks that he wants to be able to get his medical information if something happens to him and he's in the hospital or, you know, he's undergoing some sort of medical care. Now, the next thing that's going to be important for Mr. Beast is a personal property memorandum. This is a separate document from a trust or will, itemizes pieces of personal property that you want someone in particular to have. So for example, Mr. Beast may want to leave his Nerf gun to someone in particular, and he could list that out on his personal property memorandum and say, I leave my Nerf gun to, you know, whomever. He can change that anytime he wants to. This is the one estate planning document that we're going to allow him to write on anytime he wants to. Everything else, you shouldn't write on it because that can lead to confusion about what your intentions were. So you never want to write on any of your estate planning documents, handwrite on them other than your personal property memorandum, which is a document that's designed for you to be able to update that in your own handwriting anytime you want to. And then that personal property memorandum will be referenced in the trust or the will, and it says, hey, I've left this personal property memorandum and I want you, Mr. or Mrs. Trustee or executor, I want you to follow my instructions on that personal property memorandum for distributing my items of personal property. We found that's a much better way to address personal property than listing everything out in the trust or the will, because you think about, you know, Mr. Beast's Nerf gun, well, there's probably going to be an update on that Nerf gun next year and he's going to want a new one. So he may get rid of the one that he has and he's got a new Nerf gun, and we don't want him to have to come back and update his trust or update his will to address that item of personal property. So what he would do is he'd take that personal property memorandum, line through the 2023 Nerf gun and put the 2024 Nerf gun down there and who he wants to have it. So that's the purpose of a personal property memorandum. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we know from things that Mr. Beast has done in the past that he has charitable intentions. He wants to give away a lot of the money that he's earning through his content creation. And there are ways that we can do that are tax advantaged, that benefit both the charity and the donor. So in this case, Mr. Beast, if he wanted to give away assets to a charity, we can set up a special type of trust for him called a charitable remainder trust. And what that trust will allow is for him to continue to receive an income off of that asset for a period of time, 10 years, his lifetime, different, factors go into making those decisions, but he will be able to receive an income. He will also get an income tax deduction for the contribution to a charity of that asset. And then when he passes away, the charity will own that asset and can liquidate it or whatever they need to do with it at that point. So that would be a great way to handle Mr. Beast's charitable intentions and getting some of his money out to charities now during his lifetime. The next thing I'm going to recommend for Mr. Beast is that we use Wyoming LLCs for his business. Wyoming has some special statutes that make LLCs in Wyoming a great way to protect your assets. So in the Wyoming statutes, they specify that the only way that a creditor can get at the assets of an LLC is through something called a charging order. And the way a charging order works is that the creditor obtains a judgment against you and they receive a charging order against the LLC assets. And that allows them simply to receive an income from the LLC that would have gone to you instead. So what do we do if there's a situation like this? We just quit distributing income from the LLC, and that way the creditor won't be getting that income. So it's a great asset protection vehicle. The other nice thing about Wyoming is they don't have an income tax, so there's no tax ramifications to putting your LLC there. You are required to have a registered agent in Wyoming, but you always have to have a registered agent for an LLC, so not really a problem. But Wyoming, great place to set up LLCs. We can also do it in a way that gives you some privacy so that people don't know what assets are in that Wyoming LLC, and you get all the benefits of the asset protection. Now, the next thing that we would consider for Mr. Beast would be using land trust for any of his real estate. A land trust is simply a grantor trust that's set up specifically to hold real estate. And some states have statutes for land trust, like Illinois, for example, has a land trust statute. Other states don't have land trust statutes, but you can establish a land trust in any state. It's just a grantor trust with the special purpose of holding real estate. Now, the reason for using a land trust is that you can obtain anonymity with a land trust. So you can prevent people from being able to do a public search and find out what kind of real estate you own through the use of land trusts. What we would do is set up perhaps a Wyoming LLC for Mr. Beast. We'll transfer real estate to that Wyoming LLC. He will not be connected in that Wyoming LLC to that Wyoming LLC at all, because in Wyoming you don't have to disclose who the owners are. You don't have to disclose who's the management of the LLC, none of that. So he would not be connected to that LLC. We transfer the real estate into that LLC. The land trust has a trustee that's another Wyoming LLC, and then we put the Wyoming LLC that holds the real estate into that land trust. So no tax ramifications to that because Wyoming doesn't have any income tax, and we've been able to effectively hide that asset so that any creditors that Mr. Beast has won't be able to find that through a public search, and we've given him some great asset protection as well. So the next thing, so if you're interested in learning more about how we help families protect their legacies from probate, predators, and government intrusions, I wrote a free book titled The Ultimate Gift that lays it all out. If you'd like to pick up your free copy of The Ultimate Gift, simply click the link below, give us your address and a credit card for shipping and handling fees, and we'll ship it out to you free of charge. Read The Ultimate Gift so you can learn how to protect your family. That we want to consider for Mr. Beast is setting up a Nevada Domestic Asset Protection Trust. Nevada is a great state for asset protection. They have a special type of trust called a Domestic Asset Protection Trust that we can use to protect assets from creditors. Now remember, we've got already for Mr. Beast, we have his Revocable Living Trust, we have probably some land trust for real estate, and then we're going to establish this Nevada Domestic Asset Protection Trust. This trust would be for holding other assets, so perhaps the business assets go into this Domestic Asset Protection Trust. Maybe some of the real estate could go in there as well. There's other factors that we would have to consider in terms of what would go into that trust, and we can establish it so that Mr. Beast is able to maintain control over the investments that the Domestic Asset Protection Trust holds. So we can establish a Wyoming LLC that's inside of the Nevada Domestic Asset Protection Trust, and we can make Mr. Beast the manager of the Wyoming LLC. That means that he's then making all the decisions about the assets in the LLC. He can run his businesses out of there, whatever he needs to do. He can receive income from the Domestic Asset Protection Trust, and we can give him a way to access the principal, the funds in the Domestic Asset Protection Trust if needed. So it's a great vehicle for protecting assets from creditors. The other thing we can do is we can use a sale to that Domestic Asset Protection Trust to freeze the value of some of his businesses. So we would get valuations done, and then transfer those by way of a sale. He's selling it to himself effectively, so there's no tax issues there. And by doing that, we can freeze that value at whatever the value was on the day that we made that transfer, so that his estate, we're getting those assets outside of his estate. We can eliminate maybe all of that $36 million estate tax exposure that he has, but we can definitely reduce it by using this sale to the Domestic Asset Protection Trust. So great way to get asset protection, and we can do some estate tax planning with it as well. And then the last thing that we want to consider for Mr. Beast, I'm assuming since he's a 24-year-old, seems to be in pretty decent health based on what I see in his YouTube videos, I'm assuming that he can probably get some life insurance if he doesn't have it already. And so the last piece is we would set up an irrevocable life insurance trust to hold that life insurance. That would be outside of his estate, so it wouldn't count towards the overall value of his estate. And when he passes away, the cash that's generated by that death benefit on the life insurance policy will be available to help satisfy any remaining estate tax liability that his estate may face. So there you have it. That's how I would plan for Mr. Beast if he came to sit down with me to talk about his estate planning. It's been a fun exercise, and hey, Mr. Beast, if you need any help, give me a call. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, then take a moment right now to subscribe by clicking below and turn on the bell notification so you get notified every time we post up a new video. Right now we're posting 3 videos a week with lots of information about various estate planning topics, so you're going to want to make sure to stay on top of that. Click below to subscribe, and click right over here to watch the next most relevant video about estate planning. Go watch it now.